This is Do It For a Living, your source for inside information on the future of automotive performance. What's holding you back from starting or growing your business into what it can be? Well, if you're listening to this, it's not a lack of information. What you're about to hear is all you need to get motivated and start making waves. Do It For a Living podcast details the journey of today's true players in their own words. Find out how they broke out so you can too. The time is now. The time is always now. So I got Jason Siebels here, the creator of Pro EFI. Jason, how's it going?
It's going good. How are you?
I'm living the dream, baby. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your business. How did you get started and what's your background?
I got started just kind of like most people in this industry, is a passion for racing and figuring this, new technology out as it comes by. I started tinkering with cars like most kids when I was 16, and everything from the normal engine swaps, carburetor swaps to, eventually into fuel injection in the late 80s. And, one thing led to another, and I started building cars for other people, and that led to finding new technologies and working with other manufacturers, and then eventually building our own stuff.
So what kind of racing were you involved in first?
A lot of it was, anywhere from autocrossing, road racing to drag racing a little bit later. But when you start making a lot of power, that's pretty much all you can do with it.
Right. So your background is in the drag racing world, just started tinkering. Were you employed in the industry before you were doing your own thing?
No.
Or did you start in the industry first with Pro EFI?
I started in the industry first with a shop, just a regular, shop that modified cars and things like that. And then that eventually turned into Pro EFI in the late 90s.
Okay. So your shop did general performance upgrades, dyno tuning, stuff like that?
Exactly, yeah.
Gotcha. So tell us a little bit about Pro EFI. What is it? What's the goal? What's the company history?
Pro EFI, like I said, was started in the late 90s. We were working with a company called Gems out of the UK, developing some of that. Then, in early 2000, I went to work at AEM, and they took over a lot of the Gem stuff, and I had originally designed the first plug-and-play kits in the late 90s, and that's kind of what turned into the AEM stuff. And then, in looking at doing things better, bigger, better, higher tech, I ventured back out on my own again with the current company as you see it.
So AEM was really the first one to do plug-and-play on that scale.
No.
What was your involvement over there?
Pro EFI was.
On my radar.
Actually, Pro EFI was. And then they liked the idea. And then that's when they hired me to come over there, and we developed it into a more refined, I guess, version of plug and play.
So how do they lure a guy like you that makes the idea and convince you that, to work with them? And is it the idea that you can make it bigger and reach more people?
Resources more than anything else.
Right. So have you always been a car guy, Jason? Do you come from a car family?
No. I've always been a car guy, but I'm probably, my younger brother is, but aside from that, nobody else in my family was really into cars like this. My sister a little bit, but, obviously not like a guy would be.
Sure. So in an effort to kind of get this thing kicked off and really get people interested, I want you to explain the worst experience that you've had in business. And this should be a situation that had you flat on the floor ready to quit. Maybe you messed up on something or missed something. How do you recover and overcome from a situation like that? Take us there.
There's a lot of times where you kind of wonder, is it worth the effort? But I've kind of never really been that guy to quit. I see a challenge more as, I'm gonna prove that I can do this, or I know I can do this, and that kind of stuff makes me more motivated more than it does discourage me, if that makes any sense.
So if you run into something that's super difficult and it's going to kick your ass, you look at it as a challenge and not as a defeat?
Yeah, look at it as a way to, to find a way around it, a way to overcome it. And it happens to all of us a lot. You really only have two choices at that point. You can give up, you can push through. And that kind of stuff typically motivates me more. I find that when those things happen is when I come up with some of my better ideas.
When you're backed up against a corner.
Right.
So in your career, was there ever a moment that you were really disappointed, discouraged, and ready to quit? Like pissed off, annoyed? What was it? There's got to be a situation like that comes to mind when you were ready to just call it quits.
I can't say that that I can honestly think of a time when I was ready to quit. I've certainly been pissed off. I've been plenty annoyed, and I've been very discouraged at times, and I've had things go the exact opposite way I had intended them to. But it's a lot of people in the industry that I know give me support, which helps. And it's a lot of those guys, and my family gives me great support too. And those things combined, I just have never seen it as something that I can quit at. It's just something that you've got to push through. Right.
So how about a situation? You kind of chuckled there when you said you've had some situations where you were pissed off or discouraged. Can you tell us about? Is there any one particular situation that's coming to mind?
Well, there's major ones, and some people know the story, some people don't.
What story is that?
Without getting this is one of those things that it's going to probably irritate a lot of people, but it is what it is. The whole thing with AM obviously didn't go the way I had planned. I was made a lot of promises that weren't fulfilled. I wasn't treated very well in the end. And it's when all that happened, it kind of refocused me, and that's when I went to do my own thing.
But you were already doing your own thing beforehand.
I was doing my own thing beforehand, but I had to start from scratch. When that whole thing happened, my resources that I had prior went away, so I had to start over and literally rebuild from scratch.
So at the point then, you're pretty seriously motivated. You have some resources. You're moving forward. What were your limitations, and how many hours a day were you working at that point? I mean, are you fired up to the point that you're up at 5 o'clock in the morning, you're working till 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're doing it over and over and over again?
At times, yeah. I try not to, work those kind of hours anymore, but at times,
yeah.
You don't have a choice. In the last, 5 or 6 months, we've been working on some projects that have just been, one of those 95% there type deals, and that last 5% have taken a lot of effort to get to. But yeah, I don't, I don't wake up in the morning going, I got to go to work. I get up, I go to work. I enjoy what I do. I enjoy the people that I work with. I enjoy a lot of people in the industry, don't get a chance to see them as often as I'd like. But, we talk, on a daily basis, most of the time. And, I get good ideas from my dealers, and we work together on a lot of different projects. And so, yeah, I stay motivated in that respect. I have kids, which, take time, but I always take the time. But when I'm not doing those things, I'm typically doing Pro EFI stuff.
Jason, you mentioned that you have really good support from your family. Are you talking about your parents, your wife, your kids? Talk to me about that.
My wife, my kids, my brothers, my sister, my mom, my dad passed away a couple of years ago. But, when he was around, he gave me good support, and it's, they know it's hard work, and they help out when they can. And I'm lucky enough to have a wife who's, an industry leader in her profession, as an accountant, as a CPA and CFO. And so she helps us a lot with the business, with just the financial side of things and the administration side of things. And that's helped a ton.
For sure. I mean, being able to use the resources to the best of your abilities and having those resources to lean on is huge.
Absolutely.
So what's the goal for Pro EFI? What are you trying to do that's different than other engine management systems?
Well, what we really focus on is trying to take accidents and driver issues out of the equation. So in other words, anything that the computer can do, we try and make it do. So, we spoke a little bit earlier about some of this stuff, before the interview started, but basically, we have a lot of sensor inputs, and we take those and we tie them into fault management, so that if things happen, whether it's a mistake in tuning or some oversight, the computer's there to monitor things and take control and prevent engine damage. Obviously in this industry, the most expensive thing that you're going to put in is in the engine, and it's also one of those things that tends to be more of a perishable item, unfortunately, but it's expensive. So we try and do things in such a way where we minimize that damage. If I get probably one of the most common things that I get feedback from our end customers is that, hey, this thing saved my engine. I had this failure, I had that failure, and thank you so much. And people really take pride in owning Pro EFI, which is very interesting to me because it's just, it's a mechanical part that you stick in a car. You don't look at it, you don't see it. You don't. When you're parking and you're driving, you're walking inside, you don't turn around and look at the ECU. You're looking at a car, right? So when I see those things and I hear those things, it makes me feel good. It makes me think that what I'm doing is making a difference, and people enjoy it. So it's great.
So how about you have 2 fuel pumps and you lose the second fuel pump? How can Pro EFI keep your engine in one piece?
Well, what we do is we monitor fuel pressure all the time. And so when it sees a drop in pressure, the injectors will compensate up to the point where either you're out of injector or the differential pressure loss is so great, it's going to trigger a fault, and that fault can, turn on a boost cut. It can, drop the boost back down, however the user wants to configure it. But at the end of the day, you set a limiter and all these other safeguards to prevent engine damage. So same thing with oil pressure. If oil pressure drops, you can, have it turn on a limiter so you can minimize damage and things like that. So we're always looking at all the sensors all the time, so the driver doesn't have to. You can have 10 gauges in the car, but let's face it, at the end of the day, you got a 1,500 horsepower car going down the track.
You're not looking at the gauges.
Exactly. You're looking straight ahead. So right. The computer's there to kind of do those things. And, at times it can be frustrating for people that aren't used to this type of system because it's going to force you to make sure that your mechanical setup is correct. If you don't have the right fuel system in there and you're putting 2,000 cc injectors in there to compensate for a lack of fuel flow, it's just not the right way to do it, and the computer's going to make you fix it. But when it's right, you're not going to have engine failures. You're not going to have conventional type engine failures. It's going to be something else that hurts the engine.
So from a software standpoint, does it come pre-configured with those safeties?
Most of the standard safeties it does. Some of the other stuff you kind of have to go in and set up because every tuner is going to want something done a little bit differently. Or, I get this a lot of guys, I realize I'm on the edge with my fuel pumps, but I've got enough injector that I can compensate for it. And sooner or later, somebody's going to wind up turning some of that stuff off. And, and they may get away with it for a while, and then they may not. So it kind of depends. But a lot of it's, kind of up to the tuner how involved they want those securities to be.
So what if the user doesn't have all the sensor inputs? Do you require them to add them?
We pretty much require them fuel pressure at minimum. The other stuff is kind of there already, but, guys don't necessarily put in oil pressure sensors and things like that. But the guys that are, usually they'll start out kind of small like most people do. They'll, buy the basic kit and then they'll add stuff as they go, EGTs and back pressure sensors and things like that. And if they really are serious about what they're doing, unfortunately, people throw around the term 1,000 horsepower car a lot because it is very easy to make that kind of power these days. But when you're doing it, you really should have a lot of safety stuff built in there for anything else but to make the car safe. You blow an engine up at 150 miles an hour going down the street, you're probably going to have a hard time keeping that car straight. So, if you have some of this other stuff involved that just shuts the car down before it gets to that catastrophic point, maybe you save the car, maybe you save a life. You don't know.
Do you find that it's a hurdle to overcome when people think that a 1,000 horsepower tune is created equal across the board? Meaning, if you can do it with a factory ECU and it can make the number, do you find that that's a hurdle you guys have to overcome? Because there's definitely a difference between doing it and doing it with safeties in place.
There absolutely is. And it is a conversation that we have regularly, especially when it comes to some of the bigger engine cars because it's so easy to get there. And there's some pretty good tuning software out there for some of the factory ECUs. But you're right. And it doesn't give you this type of safety. It doesn't give you this type of, our traction control and some of the other things that we add to the mix that you just can't do on the factory ECU. They're not designed for that. Factory traction control is designed to keep you from putting the car in a ditch. It's
not to keep the car moving forward as fast as possible.
Right, exactly. So that's a conversation that we have a lot. And until you can get a customer to really experience it, it's hard for them to understand what that really means.
I feel like from a sales side, it's really frustrating to have that conversation when the customer is, they're out on the street bumping elbows with the other guys that are talking about it, reading about it, but there's only a handful of guys that are really doing it. So I feel like without the experience, it's hard to get them a lot of street-oriented customers, especially these big horsepower or big engine cars that are just really easy to get 1,000 horsepower, really. Relatively.
Yep. But
it's hard to get their buy-in from the get-go. They have to experience a bad situation before they're going to move forward into an ECU that's 4 times the cost of a factory engine controller.
Exactly. Yeah, you're going to either have to have a bad experience or you're going to go out there and you're going to get your rear end kicked by somebody who is using the technology. That's pretty much the only way you're going to make that sale, because most people's concern, unless they're really hardcore, is what did it make on the dyno? I got customers that I just want to make 1,000 one time to have a dyno number, and then they're never going to do anything with it but drive to a car show with it. So, and maybe that's not necessarily our customer, but, we have that stuff in place, and it's for a reason. And when you experience it and you use it and you see the difference that it makes, it's pretty hard to argue how inexpensive it really is at the end of the day. If you got $15,000, $20,000 engine, it saves you 2 or 3 times. What was that $4,000 worth, really?
Right. But again, you have to have that experience to get that perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a struggle that we have in the tuning industry for sure.
Absolutely.
So how user-friendly is your software? Is it designed to be tuned by the end user, or is it designed just to be tuned by the dealer?
It's absolutely designed to be tuned by the end user. And, I think that one of the difference we have at Pro EFI is I'm a tuner. I've been a tuner for, I'm dating myself here, obviously, but close to 30 years now. It's kind of scary when you think about it. But I have a very good grasp of the things that you need to look for, the things that you need to get the job done right, what makes life easier. And I've kind of taken the approach of laying out our software that way. And most people's software is written by a software engineer who's never tuned a car, maybe 1 or 2, but never really, as a profession to get a car in and out off the dyno in a convenient amount of time for the customer and a convenient amount of time to save all your hard parts. The more dyno pulls you make with the tune being bad, the more damage you can do before things get right. And, and a lot of people don't understand that. I can usually get a car on and off our dyno in less than an hour if it doesn't have any mechanical issues, and the car will run and drive perfectly. And that's kind of how we've laid out our software, is to help you do that in a timely fashion. But if you're not used to looking at our software, some of the things might seem kind of confusing. We have live strip charts so you can see hysteresis without saving and opening logs all the time. It's just right there all the time. So things like that. So I think it's very easy to use, and most of my customers would agree once they spend a little time on it and use it. Like any new thing, it takes a little time to get used to.
So explain the difference in your display of hysteresis versus another engine controller.
Well, like when you're on the dyno and you make a pull, typically the convention is you make your pull, the car idles down, you idle the car while you look at the log, but you have to save it, you have to open the log, you come in and look at it, you go in between the log viewer and the calibration to make your changes, and then you close your logger down, set up a new template, and make another pull. Well, with ours, you make a pull, you hit the space bar, it pauses all the data right on the screen in a strip chart form like you're looking at a log. And you can go right into your fuel tables, make your changes right there real quick, or into your boost control tables or whatever you happen to be doing at that time, hit the space bar and you're ready to go again. You aren't saving files just endlessly and having to open them back up. And it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it might save you 15, 20 minutes in an hour session. So it adds up pretty quickly.
No doubt. How different is your software from what we're used to in the tuning market, Motec, Haltech, and AEM?
Well, it's ultimately you're doing the same things for the most part. If you need more fuel, you make the numbers bigger. If you need less fuel, you make the numbers smaller. Timing-wise, same thing. You need more time, you make the numbers bigger, you need them smaller. But, you know, it's a true volumetric efficiency system, and some people, you know, throw around the term speed density, not really understanding what that really means. And most of the newer systems are coming out with volumetric efficiency. That's true speed density. The earlier Motec stuff and AEM stuff and some of the other systems were lookup tables. They never did any density calculations. You know, they didn't know engine displacement. They didn't know fuel flow characteristics or any of that stuff. None of that stuff was entered. And to have true speed density, you need that information. So it makes it easier on the back end. It's a lot easier to get a car up and running quickly if you do your due diligence and set everything up from the beginning. I spend more time with the key on going through setup than I probably do making dyno pulls, because if you don't have the right setup in there, none of the information that you get during the pull is going to be worth anything. You'll have to start over and do it again later.
So the beauty of your system is setting up the foundation stuff, a lot like maybe Autronic was 15 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, kind of similar. Actually, I was an Autronic dealer years ago, too, so I'm relatively familiar with the earlier stuff, not the later stuff. But we get really in-depth into setting up, you know, all aspects of the fuel system so that we know, you know, the computer doesn't – it calculates pulse width based on what you're asking for a fuel mixture. So if you don't have the correct displacement entered in there and the correct volumetric efficiency, the correct injector scalings and offsets, then those numbers aren't going to mean anything, because your fuel table isn't really a fuel table. It's a volumetric efficiency table. So that, combined with everything else, gives you an end pulse width, the fuel number, if that makes sense.
Right. I'm just trying to figure out what other questions I'd like to ask specific to your product. How does it differ from I guess you've explained to some level how it differs from other competitors like Motec and Haltech. Is there any one key feature that makes Pro EFI different from an ECU such as a Motec or a Haltech or an AEM?
Well, we have the fault manager is a big one. The fault manager, they're starting, other competitors are starting to throw around that term a little bit, that they do fault management. Ours is a true fault manager. In other words, everything's tied into the fault manager. So you can create instances upon instances of what to do when something isn't right. It's not just, hey, if boost goes over this, add a cut. That's not really fault management. You can tie in a boost cut to, anything. Your brake pressure is too high, literally on ours, if you wanted to. If you're standing on the brakes and the throttle's stuck and it's a mechanical throttle, you could say, okay, shut the engine down. You can't do that. Other systems, all that stuff's tied in. That's a big thing. Our hardware is second to none as far as durability goes. It's called ruggedized equipment, the stuff we use. It's meant to be abused thoroughly.
Meaning you could put it in an engine bay?
Yeah, you can put it in an engine bay. You can put it in a paint shaker. You can run it underwater. I've had guys literally take 16-volt systems, hook up the battery backwards for 15, 20 minutes trying to figure out why they can't connect up to it. And the ECU's unharmed. Other ECUs would catch on fire if you did that. So, our stuff is really stout. The hardware is incredibly stout. Our operating system that runs the engines, like I said, it's OE quality. You'll find that our stuff runs and drives better than pretty much anything out there. I would put it against any aftermarket ECU as far as actual drivability. And wide open throttle is great. It's what everybody looks at, but unfortunately that's not the hard part. Making it drive nice for anybody to be able to jump in a car that's highly modified and make it drive nice on the street, that's the hard part, and that's what I think we do best.
So do you have drive-by-wire control?
Absolutely. We've even got guys that run 2 drive-by-wires.
Okay. So let's say one specific example, 2010 Corvette. Mm-hmm. What application do you have for that car? Like, do you have a plug-and-play ECU for a 2009 Vet?
Yep, we sure do. Yep.
Okay. And then does it drive the factory gauge cluster? How do you work with modern vehicles that have all the CAN communication to multiple body modules?
Well, you do have a couple of different options depending on how in-depth you want to go. We've got one that runs piggyback that allows the stock ECU to still be in the car to communicate with some of the stuff. Or you can have a complete standalone where we drive the gauges and everything. We just finished up a 2013 ZL1 Camaro. That kit applies to the CTSV, the ZL1 obviously, and then the ZR1 Corvette, and it controls the gauges, all the lights, everything. You drive the car and you have no idea that it's got an aftermarket computer in it. And it's
so you have a full replacement ECU that even communicates via CAN bus.
Yep, it talks to the body control modules, the ABS modules, everything.
Wow, that's badass.
Yeah, allows us to do a few other cool things too, like you can use the gauges as indicators. So let's say, for example, you want to see what you got your rev limit set to for launch control. You push the clutch in while you're stopped, hold the cruise up button down, and it'll move the tach needle to show you where your RPM launch control is set to. You take the clutch off and just use the brake and hit the cruise down. It'll tell you what iBoost setting you want or where you're set to, and you can change it right through the cruise control inputs. So there's some pretty cool stuff that we can do through the gauges to give driver feedback as well.
Right, so you've got inputs and outputs that you can use the factory switches to actually control and make changes on the fly.
Exactly, yep.
Okay. So when you were first getting EFI going, do you actively go out and spread the word, or did your customers do this for you?
I had a lot of good working relationships with a lot of my dealers, and that's kind of where we got started. So, But
how do you establish a dealer network from the beginning?
Well, how I did it was just industry people that I knew. I went to guys that I had met over the years and raced with and worked with, and I went out and I trained those guys and showed them the system. And the guys that have known me, know I've been doing this for a long time. They trust me, and I've taught them a lot of things over the years. They've taught me things over the years, and we work pretty good together. And so we went out with a couple of platforms that we got done, and went to a couple of dealers and got them, putting them on cars, and the customers loved it. And we're just kind of spreads like that. We haven't been a strong marketing company at all. It's been mainly all word of mouth and just building the best product we can build.
Yeah. So how big is Pro EFI, and how big are you trying to take it?
It's never really been about, where we can get to. That's always something you think of as a businessman, but I focus mainly on, just building the best product for the customer and building the best product for us and what we can do and things like that. But, I think that, we're not as big as we should be, definitely not as big as we could be. But we're growing at a pretty good rate. It's a fairly comfortable rate. And, it's allowing us to have the time to do the things that we enjoy most, which is going to the track and learning new strategies and coming up with cutting edge control strategies. The technology has gotten to the point where, like we said, it's so easy to make power. You got to figure out how to use it now. And so that's kind of where we've been kind of going towards is making it safe to use 1,500 horsepower on the street.
Right. And that's a big one that really only a handful of people are talking about, but there's a big void in trying to put 1,500 horsepower down on two tires on the street. Like that's, it really doesn't happen until fifth gear. So when you're trying to do that in third and fourth gear, it's a hairy experience. It's like you're going to put cars into a wall.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. And it's funny when I talk to people that are out there at the track. Everybody wants that because their buddy has it. But until you go out there, I've got a C6 twin turbo Z06 that, I run around at about 1,100 horsepower. And I never feel that power, like you said, until you're well over 100 miles an hour. So driving it on the street, it's pretty manageable. But its lowest setting is 850. So in any gear through third, I can spin street tires, no problem. It'll smoke street tires until I take my foot out of it. But even with drag radials on it, without the traction control, it's a death trap. You got to really know what you're doing with a car like that. You really do. And I've been, like I said, I've been doing this a long time. I've raced fast cars. I've driven fast cars all my life. And to put somebody just because they have money into a car like that behind the wheel, it's really not a safe thing to do.
It's funny that you say that because a car like that, you really can't even put full throttle down, even on a set of drag radials, until probably fourth gear, and even then you're going to have to roll into it. If power comes on too hard, it's going to be, it's going to be lights out, meaning, you're just going to turn the tire to smoke. So in that situation, tell us about your traction control. How do you tackle that situation?
Well, there's a few things that we do, and, a lot of this, again, is come from track development and testing a lot on the street with the absolute worst conditions, raining, things like that. And high horsepower cars are great test beds because, they have the ability to go from, perfect traction to absolutely, negative traction to where the car stops accelerating when the tires spin completely. And so what we do is we approach it from a couple of different angles. And depending on the setup of the car will dictate how you use these tools. But we first start retarding timing. You have an allowed table that you enter that says I'll allow this much slip over my non-driven wheels.
Okay, so it says I'm getting this number of rotations for the front wheels. How much of a differential can we have for the rears?
Right. So if my front tires are going 20, I'll allow my rears to go 25 or whatever.
And the units are mile an hour?
Yeah, in older versions it was percentage of slip, but now we've changed it to mile an hour because it actually is a little bit more effective from a stop. So
okay.
we've tweaked some things found improvements there. So once you exceed that allowed table, then based on the error between the two, you're going to pull timing first, and then depending on how great the error gets, you can also have a table, if it's electronic throttle, that will close the throttle in feedback. And then if it's bad enough, you go into a cut, which is actually triggering the fault manager. So once you're in the fault manager, you can, if it's a nitrous car, you can turn off nitrous. You can drop to low boost. You can switch to the low octane table. I mean, just a bunch of different options that you get once you're in the fault manager's world. But one of those things is a soft cut. So in the soft cut's calibratable number of cylinders. So we can make the traction control experience very seamless. It's not abrupt to where it's hooking and then blowing the tire off and hooking. It's just gets to the point where it's hazing the tire just enough above your desired speed to where the car maintains maximum acceleration. And
how does it haze the tire?
It literally will just control right to that limit. So if the tires,
through what control method?
What's that? Sorry?
Through what control method?
Through both throttle, timing, and cut. It'll target that speed that's just above the non-driven wheel speed.
But you were explaining the soft cut situation. Can you elaborate on the soft cut?
Sure. So the soft cut, that starts to enter if you're getting so much error that the timing and throttle alone isn't allowing you to do it. Now, and this is where the calibration part of it, but let's just take this twin-turbo Corvette we were just talking about. When you start closing throttle on a turbo car, what eventually happens? You stall the turbocharger, right?
Right, it slows down.
Well, if you stall the turbocharger, now you've got the delay to get that turbocharger back online.
Back up to speed, sure.
Yeah, so now you aren't maintaining the maximum acceleration. So you want to kill power in ways that keeps the turbocharger ready for when you're able to use it. So closing the throttle will reduce power up to the point where it stalls the turbo. So in between the point of stalling the turbo and reducing power, that's where you want to limit the throttle portion of it. But if that's not enough, then we have to start dropping cylinders. It's the last thing you really want to do because let's just take for round number's sake, if we got an 800 horsepower car that's an 8-cylinder, well, one cylinder is 100 horsepower. Well, I probably don't need 100 horsepower worth of cut to maintain traction. Probably only need 50 or 40 or 30 or depending. But if you start cutting cylinders, now you're into the point of being, pretty abrupt and very grainy in its response. So we want to use timing and throttle reduction to get to the point where we're maintaining maximum acceleration. And if it's not enough, like let's say a car's dead hooked, it's full power, it's going down the track. The car before it put down coolant and the track officials didn't see it. Happens all the time. Okay, so you're in, at the 1,000-foot mark, full power, and all of a sudden you hit coolant. Well, you're going to have to kill a lot of power really fast. The computer's fast enough now that you can close the throttle, drop timing, and start cutting. It won't close the throttle all the way because then you get to the point of decel, and that can be more dangerous. But it's just the point where it controls the tire enough to keep the car straight. And that's ultimately what you want to do. And that's like a worst-case scenario. From dead hooking to no traction, hitting some lubricants on the street or at the track.
Right. So the first method is ignition retard, and then you go to throttle closure, and then you go to ignition cut.
Yeah,
that enters fault manager and also will reduce boost target, and even start dropping cylinders in the fault manager.
Exactly, and that's it's kind of up to the tuner at that point what he wants to do when he's in that fault manager. But if it's a turbo nitrous car, yeah, I'm gonna definitely shut off nitrous at that point too.
Sure. So first it's going to try and just cut ignition, retard ignition. If none of that stuff is helping, then it's going to start turning off auxiliary power adders, nitrous, boost control.
Exactly. And 98% of the time, the timing reduction alone with a little bit of throttle is more than enough to do it. I mean, I could show you log after log of, some of the testing that we've done where you see the throttle close in about 15 to 20%, timing retard gets down about 10 or 15 degrees, and that's all it needs to do it. The key is not letting the tire get out of control. If you hit it on the beginning and control the tire before it gets out of control, you have a much better chance of controlling it under hard acceleration. If you get it out of control, to get it back is a lot harder to do.
Right. So this has turned into a traction control discussion real quick.
Yeah, it gets pretty involved. I mean, there's a lot to it. But it's one of the things I think we do better than anybody else, and it's a lot of track testing on a lot of different types of vehicles and a lot of testing on the street, and it's taken a focus. I mean, we really had to focus on that for a period of time to really get that to the point where I can say that, hey, you can throw somebody in there that doesn't have a lot of experience in that car, and at least it's going to be relatively safe for them. I mean, it's not going to prevent them from doing stupid things, but at least it'll prevent them from being surprised.
So if we buy an ECU from you, is it pre-configured with traction control strategy?
Yes. Everything comes with it. We don't charge extra for any of that stuff.
Meaning the setup too, not just the empty tables, but actual table data. Yeah, can we get that from you as well?
Yeah, there's base calibrations, and there's also, you can do partial calibration. So like if you called me up and said, hey, I got a Corvette or a Porsche or something like that, I can send you stuff that we've done that you can drop right in that calibration and be ready to go. Not to say that they won't need tweaks here or there, but I have, for the most part, the tables that we've done are pretty applicable to most everything because you're controlling the tire differential. So the amount of power plays less a part in that setup because like I said, we're trying to control it from the initial slip percentage. We don't get it too out of hand. Try and control it very initially.
Yeah. Do you sell direct to the consumer, or do you sell only through dealers? If somebody wanted to call you up and buy an ECU, can they buy it directly from Pro EFI, or will you direct them towards a dealer?
Always direct them towards a dealer. We don't sell any retail.
Okay, so you don't correspond. The end user doesn't correspond directly with you. They talk to your dealer, and your dealer, if they can't handle it, then they can come back to you.
Right, exactly.
Right. Fair enough. So I want to get into some quick answer questions. This isn't dialogue stuff. Can you just tell us in a couple of words for these next few questions? So number one is, tell us about a game-changing product that you've seen in the last year. Anything that applies to tuning or your company, or even something that doesn't.
Let's see.
Is there anything that's coming out that's new?
We've got some. We're always trying to do new projects, but it's more kind of normal stuff. I mean, one of the game changers, I think, for us at least, is CAN control and communication with the factory body control modules and things like that allow us to integrate more nicely and give the end user a better experience. They don't have to drive around with check engine lights on and things like that. And that's kind of a bit of a game changer.
CAN communication is the future. Like, you're not going to be able to have a standalone ECU that can't communicate via CAN. It's just not going to happen because all your factory instrumentation is going to have to die without it.
Yeah, absolutely. The manufacturers are, they're finding ways to make assembly cheaper, and one of those ways to do that is through CAN. Just plugging things in and not having the guy to physically sit there and connect things, like electronic throttle and things like that. Those are installed they're time savers, and they're also engine savers for warranty purposes and things like that. So it's being able to integrate with the CAN exactly to seamlessly have the user have this experience of just it's seamless. It's like you said, we talk about power and all this kind of stuff, but the modern generation that wasn't there at the very beginning and had to go through all these hurdles to make a car run, they want to come in, they want to drop a check down and pick up a car that ran just like it did when they bought it off the showroom floor, but makes an obscene amount of power. And to do that effectively, you're going to have to do a lot of that stuff with CAN and everything else.
So how much of a hurdle is reverse engineering CAN bus on new models?
It's time consuming. It takes a lot of time to do.
So then you have to pick what platforms you're going to decide to support and which ones you're not, because the ones that you choose to support, you're going to have to dive in pretty deep.
Yeah, Yeah, it's very time consuming, but we've gotten pretty good at it. And and the factories like to throw wrenches out there, and it's as in the aftermarket, we like to think they're trying to make our jobs harder. That's not really what it is. They're trying to make their jobs easier, and by making their jobs easier, sometimes it makes our job harder. For example, the ZL1 Camaro and the ZR1. Basically, the same engine controller goes into both those ECUs from the factory, but the body control portion of the ZR1 is still C6 Corvette. The ZL1 Camaro and the CTSV have the same basic platform. So some of the CAN code in the ZR1 is still left over from the C6 Corvette. But the newer stuff from the CTSV and the ZL1 Camaros, it's a different CAN base. So it's like, 60% one and 40% the other on the ZR1. So that one took that was a little bit tricky to kind of figure out exactly what they had going on there. But once we saw what they were doing, it made it a little bit easier because I'd already had a lot of the stuff from the Corvette.
Yeah. But how much time is invested in doing that CAN bus reverse engineering and then finding the similarities between models and what does and doesn't?
It's months. It's really months. I mean, we picked up our ZL1 Camaro. We already had the ability to run the car and the powertrain with our ZR1 and CTSV kits, but to pull all of the CAN data off and figure out what everything was and what it did, it's pretty much been about a 3.5 month deal of me working on it pretty much every day. So it's very time consuming. I mean, it's interesting and I enjoy it, but it takes a lot of time.
You're both creating engine control strategy and CAN bus reverse engineering, sniffing the CAN and decoding what bits and bytes mean what?
Yes.
Okay. How much do you delegate to your team? Do you try to do everything yourself?
When it comes to the code stuff and that, I'm doing everything myself. I have some guys that help me with, some portions of it. But for the most part, 99% of it I'm doing myself.
Huh. Was software something always that clicked with you?
Yeah, I guess I was in that era where, computers started coming around when I became a teenager, I guess, and my brothers were pretty big into computers, and I started doing some relatively low-level stuff early, and then I kind of went away from computers for a few years, but kind of you just come back to it, and now computers are synonymous with racing. I mean, everybody's got a laptop in the trailer,
Yeah. And that's just going to get more and more advanced.
Yep.
I think the hard part is making the complexities of new technology user-friendly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Either that or you're just going to have really technical guys that are the ones making the changes on the keyboard, and then the end user is just going to have to not be involved. One of those two things is going to have to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's good when a customer realizes that it's out of his hands and it's over his head. There's a lot of guys out there that like to be hands-on, and that's fine. You just have to know your limitations because, like I said, that at this power level, you make one mistake. It's an easy for a factory to make a 500 horsepower engine and put it out there with a warranty because they know that, the odds of something happening to that engine in that power level is pretty low. I mean, they have to take into account for this, some old lady buying take your pick, a turbo Porsche or a blown Camaro and putting 87 octane in it. They can't control what happens at the pump. So they have to build the engine and the engine control strategies around those types of instances. But when you're making 1,000 horsepower, 1,500 horsepower, it's the difference. My analogy is like if I'm tapping you on the head with a pencil, ow, that might be annoying. Stop doing that. You swat your hand, swat the pencil away. But when you're making 1,500 horsepower, it's me taking a baseball bat and a swipe at your head. One hit and the engine's done. You just can't have those mistakes, those issues, because everything is stressed that much more.
Right. Yep.
So that's the thing you have to take into account. And, there's guys out there that don't want to touch the computer, and that's great. There's a lot of guys that do, but just do your homework. Make sure you're talking to the right people. This day of the internet, everybody's got an opinion. So, just because some guy said, hey, I did this, it doesn't mean it's right. And it doesn't mean he's going to get away with it for very long either.
Right. You got to consider the source.
Yeah. Guys fall out of airplanes and not have their parachute open, and people have lived, but I'm not going to try it.
Right. Is that the exception or the rule?
Yeah.
everybody's out there waving their hands saying, I know what I'm talking about, I know what I'm talking about. So it's hard to discern the difference between the knuckleheads and the real guys.
Exactly. And most of those guys started with somebody else in the background that knew what they're doing. They went out there and ran good at the track or whatever, and now all of a sudden they want to start working on cars, so they're the tuner, you know?
Yeah.
And it just, unfortunately, in most cases, you know, they're just working with somebody else's good work, and you know, they're just touching things up here or there, which is the easy part, obviously.
So is your target market the do-it-yourself or the garage guy, or is it the guy that's, you know, having the dealer do everything? I feel like in an AAM example, they're trying to make it like everybody their market. So AAM's trying to make it to where they make it appear like you can buy this ECU and do everything yourself. So how different is that from your strategy?
Well, I want the system to work right. And so in doing that, our strategy is mainly to go through qualified, competent dealers. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't qualified, competent end users out there that aren't capable. There are. I've met several of them, you know, and some of them have gone on to do, you know, tuning careers and been successful. But it's definitely not the majority. And there are a lot of people that when I answer questions, I'm thinking, you know, you really should not be doing this. You really need to take that to the dealer. And, you know, we do get to the point where we'll tell customers, you got to take this to the dealer. You know, I can't spend 20 hours on the phone with guys explaining to them how to set up a car and how to wire in a pressure sensor and things like that. That's not what we do. And
it's not in the scope of what you're trying to provide.
Right. And that customer ultimately is going to have a bad experience because he doesn't understand the system. He doesn't understand the engine. He doesn't understand what needs to happen to make things work correctly. And maybe he's on a learning curve just like I was when I started, and that's fine. But in today's world, things happen fast. Everybody wants things yesterday. You know, when we first started out with this, it was a process. You know, you made 15, 20 horsepower over stock. That was amazing. You know, now you're 100, 200, holy crap. But now, if you don't bring a car into a shop and walk away with at least double, what are you doing? You know what I mean? It's the expectation to the customer.
The expectation that the customer shows up with is what you have to manage, and sometimes you can't.
No, you can't. You got a guy that wants a 2,000 horsepower car. He wants to drive it around on pump gas, and it's a 3-liter 6-cylinder. He's got to run these huge injectors. And you're like, look, you just can't. With that clutch, with those injectors, and those pumps, it's not feasible. If you want 2,000 horsepower and you want to ride around the street on pump gas, you need an engine that's about 10 times bigger than the one you got.
So as an industry, how do we overcome that expectation? Like, we're never going to be able to combat what's said on the forums and what's said in parking lots. So the only way that I feel we can combat this situation is to provide accurate information, and that's what I'm here to do.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I think part of it, ultimately, we do get to the point where technology allows a portion of that. So it's kind of that same expectation that pushes this industry further and further and further, because you got, say, injector manufacturers saying, wow, you know, if I could come up with an injector that flows this amount, but I could still control it to this small pulse width, you know, everybody would buy them because...
And that's what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, so to an extent, the customer's driving the industry, and the industry's driving the customer. And it's, you know, it's been, you know, like for me at least, being around since the very beginning, you know, I remember, you know, back in the day in 1991, I had a 2.3-liter turbo Mustang SVO that made 410 horsepower to the wheels.
Damn, that's a shitload back then.
That was, that's like me saying I did that with 1,800 today. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
Where does it end? You know, as power-wise, I don't think it's ever going to end. I mean,
well, I feel like that's why traction control is so important, because if we can make 2,000 horsepower with some of these engines, the real magic is in being able to put it down.
Yeah, what do you do with it? What do you do with it? You know, you have to.
How do you control the engine power?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's, you know, like I said, we work on that stuff a lot, and we try and do as much as we can with all the other stuff as well. You know, it's tough. It's tough at times, especially for shops, you know, because you got a customer who says he wants one thing and you know it's not right for him, and how do you tell a customer he's wrong? Sometimes you just got to do it. You just got to say, look, you brought this car to me. I'm the shop. I'm going to build it. And I know what needs to be done. And I'm sorry you want that part, but this is the part that's going to be better for you.
And hold your ground, and that's all there is to it.
And you have to, because ultimately, if you try and do what the customer wants, and it doesn't work right, like it's not.
And they have a bad experience, they're not going to come back.
And everybody else is going to see that, hey, this company built that car, and it does this, and it does this. And, for every bad experience, you tell 10 people. For every good, you tell 2. You're always fighting that battle. So you got to, as a shop, you have to hold your ground and say, look, this is your goal. You give me your goal. I'll tell you how to get there. Don't tell me how to get there.
People always want to please the customer, and that's a huge thing, right? We're all here trying to make a good experience and add value for the customer. The thing is, what you have to realize is you have to think about it in a bigger perspective, and you have to say, for this customer to really have a good experience, for him to come back and enjoy this car, maybe I can't do this for him on this shoestring budget right now the way that he wants it done. So the real way to make this customer have a good experience is to hold my ground, explain this is the way that we need to do it, these are the reasons why, and if you can't do it at this point, maybe we're going to have to come back at a later time. The problem with that is people are going to walk. Some people are going to walk, but you have to let it happen.
And you have to be okay with that. Yeah, and you have to be okay with that. I mean, when I had a shop, I'd have, back then it was a lot less power, but you'd have guys come in and say, I want 600-700 horsepower. And have you ever been in a car with that much power? Maybe you should go for a ride and understand what that really means to have a 1,000 horsepower car, and because most people, it's a number. They don't understand how serious that number is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, well, everybody just throws around these numbers like it's nobody's business. Like it's,
right?
It's pretty ridiculous. I mean, I even find myself doing it. I'm looking around and I'm saying everybody's throwing these numbers around. I guess that's the new standard. And I find myself just throwing around these numbers. And you're like, this is not reality, guys.
It's crazy. My son is 13, and he's been going to the track with me since he could walk. And he'll, we'd be up in the stands, and I'll see a guy in a regular street car go out and make like a nice 10-20 pass or something like that. And I'm like, man, that's pretty good. And he'll look at me and say, that's slow. Why is it so slow? I'm like, yeah, you don't understand, man. That's, it's a 4-door sedan. The guy drove it to the track, and he's running 10-20s, And he's like, yeah,
that's fast.
But that car right there went 740. Okay, yeah, that's a race car. But the expectation for his generation, I can't imagine what that's going to be. What is it?
And how we're going to manage it as an industry.
Yeah.
How do you manage unreal expectations? That's a tough one.
Yeah, it is.
Education is the only way.
It's crazy.
I mean, it is crazy. Jason, how about a software program that you're using daily, man? This could be Excel, SolidWorks, Google Calendar. What CAN bus sniffer are you using? Tell us a software program that you're delving into.
I use Excel a lot. I use Excel a lot. It helps me keep things organized. Pretty much everything I do is in Excel. My to-do lists, I use them for, math stuff and organizing when I'm doing CAN bus. So I use that a lot. Obviously, our software I use daily. I use Blend. Microsoft Blend helps, with some of the software integration stuff that we do. MATLAB I use for real-time analysis for our firmware, so I can test everything before it actually goes into a car. That's the stuff I mainly use. And then, obviously Outlook and things like that are normal business tools that we use.
Sure. So lots of software programs in your day-to-day, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I have 3 monitors that I use. I probably need to have 5 because I have so many different things open at one time. But, yeah.
So what does your day consist of?
Well, I get here in the morning. I check my emails, respond to emails, and then I have a to-do list of things that I need to try and get done, and I start working on those and take phone calls as I have to take phone calls, and I get diverted like probably most everybody else does and have to go do other things that interrupt other things, so I just try and keep organized enough to where I can remember where I let off. And then at the end of the day, I either go home and do more work there or go to my son's baseball game or go out to dinner or whatever, cook dinner at times.
Yeah, nice. You guys, you said you have 2 guys that work there full-time with you, is that right?
Yeah, I had 3, and then 1 left, and I'm trying to figure out what I want to do to replace that situation. But yeah, I've got 2 guys here that are assembly. One of them's my younger brother. He does, manages all the assembly stuff and works with our vendors that do that stuff, and then the other guy just does all testing stuff. So R&D, building harnesses as we need them. We get a new vehicle in that we want to build, so we'll do the layout, and then he'll build the harness, and then we go on and test it and figure out what else we need to do to make that application run.
So you're the man that does all the development, and then your 2 guys work on creation of hardware.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep. I lay out the hardware, I lay out the software, the firmware, do any changes for specific control strategies for those vehicles, and then they just basically get me connected.
Right. They take the idea to reality.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. All right, so what's your favorite shop tool? Tell me something that I don't know about.
An oscilloscope. It's not my favorite shop tool because I enjoy using them, but man, being able to visually see what's going on, and every shop should have an oscilloscope. It just will. Sooner or later, it's going to save you a lot more time than it costs. And they can be kind of pricey, but it's one of those things that you just got to have.
So which oscilloscope do you use?
I have a 4-channel Tektronix, and I also have a 4-channel picoscope. The picoscope's good if you want to record data, like lengths of data. If you just need a snapshot, the Tektronix one is simpler to set up, simpler to use. You don't need a laptop. You just go connect it real quick, turn it on, and set your ranges, and you can do freeze frame. And you can also save those wave files, the signal files onto an SD card and pull them open in Excel and look at them there. So it's pretty handy for that type of stuff. And for what we do, cool. It's probably the most common tool we use.
Okay. Do you have a breakout harness for common applications?
No.
Or do you just back probe with pins?
Yeah.
How do you capture the data?
When we do testing here, we make our test harnesses in a certain way where we can probe certain wires, and then we have our own test bench that we use. But no, we don't. We really have a breakout harness. We kind of make our own.
Gotcha. Jason, to end the conversation, I got just a few more questions, and I'm going to start with what you think the future of automotive performance is going to be. We talked about CAN bus communications. That's a no-brainer. Can you elaborate on any other things that you think are going to be in our future in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, a lot of it I think is going to be hardware-driven by the aftermarket to get there, but direct injection obviously is a challenge that we're all dealing with at this point. It provides a very interesting dilemma because without the hardware support, the other type of support really isn't going to help much. You've got injectors that flow X amount, and if we don't have bigger injectors, making more power is not going to do you much good, and you can't get the fuel in the engine. So I think integration of direct injection and port injection for big horsepower builds is going to be important. Something I'm sure will come up that's even above CAN, but I think that's the main hurdles that we're going to have as far as an industry is in the performance aspect of things.
Right. I think integrating port injection and direct injection is going to probably be the way, at least from what I understand now in the conversations I've had. I feel like that's the move that's going to take the performance industry forward. But, direct injection is nothing new. I mean, the diesel community's been having injectors in the cylinder for ever and ever. Right.
No, it's not nothing new as far as the concept, but as far as what we've been doing in the aftermarket, you're gonna hit those limitations. With getting fuel in and out of the engine is going to be the next biggest hurdle, I think. And I think right now the quicker and more easily rectified solution is with
add injectors in the port.
Add and port, and then just be able to have control over the direct injectors and increase fuel flow through port injectors.
Yeah. So what's the future for you, Jason Siebels, and your company, Pro EFI?
Well, we're to the point now where we're trying to grow. Got to add people and try and do more marketing as much as we can to get our word out.
How do you find good people, Jason?
It's hard. It is. It's really hard. I wish I had a good answer for that, but you got to try and just referrals is usually a good way to do it. if you got guys that know people and have worked with them for a long time and know their work ethic, it's honestly the hardest part is work ethic. In this day and age, the younger people that are coming up are so distracted with their phones and internet and Facebook, and how do you keep people off of doing all that stuff and focus on their work? And I don't have time to babysit people all day. I already have too much to do. So it's hard. It's hard finding good people. It becomes your full-time job, right? You're a calibration engineer, or you're doing that kind of stuff, and really to have a team of people, you're going to have to become a manager. Exactly. Yeah. You're going to have to spend half of your time at least just managing your team. Yep. So the leap from a handful of guys to a full team is not just the team, but then someone to manage the team. Yep. Yeah, exactly. So the leap is a big one. Definitely. It's kind of hard to take that leap. It is. It's expensive. Yeah, it's hugely expensive. It's a big leap forward. Yeah. Meaning, you got to get all kinds of people on board. Yeah, and we put pretty much all of our money goes back into development. I mean, we are just constantly working on new strategies and new applications and stuff like that. So it's hard to say, okay, we're going to take a year of not working on development and we're going to work on building. I mean, it has to happen. We need to do it. But it's a hard decision to make because there's so much out there that we want to do. It's clear that you guys are a product-focused and not like a business management-focused team. And so, like you said, you'd have to take a year to develop or to dedicate all your time to putting this team together, and that means that the product development stuff's going to have to take a hit. It's just... Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But at some point, you got to... how do you make that leap? How do you make that decision? It's a tough one. It's one that I've been dealing with now for the past several months, but it's something that we're going to have to figure out pretty quickly. Yeah. It's really interesting to hear because, everyone was talking doom and gloom a few years ago, the 2008 thing, which honestly didn't even affect me. That wasn't even in my world. I didn't even realize that was a real thing. But the conversation has changed. Like, I really feel like the industry is ready to move forward. Everybody seems really optimistic. Everybody's really hungry. Well, it's, like I said, I've been at this a long time, and the one thing that I've always found is that no matter what's going on with the economy, people find ways to put money in their cars. They just, true. They just do. I mean, it's just not affected like other industries, and it amazes me because me personally, the first things that I see that are the most disposable to me and my family are the cars. The difference is it's their identity, man. It's fucking who they are. Right. It's who we are. Yeah. So people would rather eat ketchup soup than have to give up their car because it's not a hobby. It's their everything. It's their identity. It's who they are. Yeah, that's the reason that you go to work. They'll eat cheese and crackers, and as long as they can keep their car and play with their car, yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. It's the truth, man. We got a passionate group of people in this world. I mean, hey, face it, we're not doing it for the money, right? That's right. That's exactly right. So, Jason, hey, man, I really appreciated all the information today. The conversation could go on for hours and hours, but we got to cut it short at some point. I mean, we're already well over an hour. I've really enjoyed the topics. It's going to be stuff that I'm going to have to get off the phone call here and really marinate on. Appreciate it very much. No, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah. How do we connect with Jason Siebels and Pro EFI? How do we get a hold of you and your company? Tech at proefi.com, sales at proefi.com. Our number is 480-607-4968. Call us, and we'll answer your questions to the best of our ability. And we can find out more about your ECUs at your website? Yep. www.proefi.com. That's awesome. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it, sir. All right. Thanks, Reed. Thanks for listening to Do It for a Living. You can find out more about this guest, this show, and even details about what we just talked about at our website, doitforaliving.net. Check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/doitforaliving and tell us who you want to hear from. And most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Click subscribe. Do it now. Seriously. I'll wait while you grab your phone. Open up the podcast app, tap the subscribe button,